G'day team, welcome to another instalment of the U Project. Oh geez, I've said that a few times. What that would be the 549th time. We're staggering towards 550, Tiff.
Staggering at quite a pace, Harps.
Like a pissed bloke in a bar just stumbling towards 550.
Like it's happy hour.
What are you snacking on? What are you shoving in your gob there? Like a little fucking ferret over there.
Cashews.
What?
Cashews, Harps? Because I had them left over from yesterday's recipe.
I was listening to Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who we need to get on the show. Can you get on that? Have I told you, Dr. Rhonda Patrick?
No.
She's a gun. Can you try and find her? She's from the States. She's a super scientist. She was talking to Rogan the other day, and she was talking about walnuts and how high they are in vitamin E, and it's pretty hard to get. Vitamin E is crucial, but it's pretty hard to get other than through fish. Is it omegas? Sorry, omegas other than through fish. Start again, Harps. Omega-3. Fucking hell. It's still early in the day. Omega-3s, not vitamin E. Anyway, so I went and bought some walnuts. They're kind of like eating soap. Have you had
not
them?
My favourite nut.
As nuts go.
They're the obligation nut. They're like, oh, this is good for me. I'll have a couple of these in the mix.
They're about David Knopf. Good afternoon, sir.
G'day. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being had, mate. Now let's start with the important questions. Walnuts, yes or no?
I've got some in the cupboard. They wouldn't be my go-to nut. I'd stick with cashews or almonds as my top choices.
Yeah, I'm the almonds guy. I love cashews, but because I'm essentially a food addict, if I open the cashew door, I'm fucked because I've got no self-control with things that are that yummy. But anyway, my long-winded story that no one needs to hear is, so I've introduced walnuts into my breakfast every morning, and I've got to say, it doesn't really help the taste, but I'm going to persevere because I need some omega-3, not vitamin E, as I originally said. And also, here's an interesting fact that no one needs to know, that the fat in walnut, the fat content is nearly 70%. Can you believe that?
Wow.
That's a lot of fat.
Do chia seeds have omega-3? I feel like chia seeds, that could be an option for you.
I think you're right.
I think you're right, but I think you got to, have you seen how fucking small they are? You got to eat 1 million. It's like saying,
just trying to give you a hand, bro.
All right. Well, if anyone's got any omega-3 suggestions, I don't mind fish, but I'm not a massive fish person. All right, let's get on with the actual conversation with our actual guest. Mate, how are you? How do we find you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know where you are, but tell our listeners where you are.
I'm down in Melbourne, so in South Melbourne, which is great actually at the moment with the 5K radius, including Albert Park Lake and the Botanical Gardens. So that is quite a win in the otherwise desolate life that is locked down.
What are you doing at the moment other than not going more than 5Ks, wearing a mask when you're outdoors and isolating and all of those things? What are you doing? What's your job these days?
At the moment, I'm working on the professional speaker circuit, which is doing hilariously well in lockdown. So doing a lot of online webinars and podcasts and things like this to sort of help people learn from the journey I went through down in Antarctica over the last year and a half and the lessons we've learned and what we did there. That's my day job. Outside of that, renovating the house, built a new staircase, put in a feature wall, built a deck, currently landscaping, turning my backyard into pretty much an outdoor beer garden, which gets
perfect
bigger and fancier every time I come up with a new idea. And then if it goes on much longer, I'm going to rip out a bathroom and probably do most of that myself as well. So that's keeping me busy.
You need a pool and you need a diving board off the roof into the pool, son.
Yeah, I wish I had the space for that. There's not a lot of room in my place.
Now, when did you get back from, and obviously people will know a little bit about the story because they will have read the promo or the synopsis of the show. What made you head to Antarctica?
Well, like a lot of things. I went down there for the first time about 5 years ago with a bunch of mates. We went mountaineering and snowboarding down there, which, that was the sort of challenge and the drive was to get down there and just go snowboarding where no one else had really been. But then I started to fall in love with the wildlife and the sheer wilderness that is Antarctica. There's just so little down there in terms of human presence and human interference. You just get to see whales and penguins and seals and everything in the natural environment. And it's absolutely spectacular. So that sort of drew me down there in the first times. And then the challenge of going down there and running one of the stations was another professional challenge as a leader to go down and face that in an ordinary year. And then, of course, we were lucky enough that we left towards the end of 2019 and missed out on most of 2020, but watched as the pandemic unfolded from the safety of Antarctica. But then it left us in a pretty awkward spot of they weren't able to come and get us as planned. So we were stuck down there a little bit longer and ended up doing well over 500 days away from Australia before we got back in April 2021.
So you headed off for 12 months-ish, is that correct?
Yep, that's right. So ordinarily you go down as a wintering team for 12 months. You do a summer and a winter or a winter and a summer, and then they come and pick you up. But we were lucky enough, if is one way to describe it, but we went down for a summer winter and stayed for a whole other summer and a bit.
And you ended up, according to my research, 537 days, which is, what is that? That's like it's like a year and 2/3 almost. So what about supplies and food and all of that stuff? How did you go with that?
The way they set up the Antarctic stations in the Australian program and others is that they are resupplied for much longer than is anticipated. So we had 2 years worth of food and fuel and critical items, and we got a little bit into that, but we still had enough that if we'd gone on to more power saving modes and rationing, you could last a bit longer. But funnily enough, you talked about cashew nuts before. We had a run on, everyone liked to eat the unsalted raw cashews, but we ran out of those at a point. So we're actually desalinating the salted cashews to make them healthier. They kind of, you think that your walnuts taste like soap, a desalinated cashew nut kind of starts to taste a bit funny as well. So we did start running out of things along the way, and that often made things a bit more interesting, but we never really ran out of anything critical.
How does one desalinate salted cashews, mate? Is water involved in a tea towel? What's the process?
Absolutely, or something like that. I mean, we run them, just spray them with a high pressure water hose thing in a strainer sort of colander thing and hope for the best. Shake it around a bit like panning for gold, shake it around a bit. Spray them again. I
know it varies wildly, but what's the outside temperature in winter and in summer up there, give or take?
So I think the coldest we had at Davis was around -30 or so in the depths of winter. But it's the wind that gets you. So -30 on a still day or a crystal clear blue sky day, you remember there's no ozone layer down there, it wouldn't be too bad in some respects. In fact, on those sort of days, you go outside and throw a pot of hot water in the air and it'll all freeze instantaneous. So you can kind of get these cool photo effects and everything done, which everyone loves doing. But when you've got 100km/h winds, you exposed skin will get frostbite almost immediately. So that's pretty rough. On a summer's day though, you're looking at, I think hottest temperatures are about 5 or 6 degrees. And again, you can be sitting out on the deck with a icy cold beer, getting worried about getting sunburnt because the UV is so extreme. And as long as there's no wind, you'll be right in shorts and a t-shirt.
I saw a picture of you and some lunatics, and you'd cut a hole, which you lovingly referred to as a pool. I'm like, come on, bro. But anyway, so you had a pool, you had a ladder into your, in inverted commas, pool, and it was, I think it was -2 Celsius, which is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what I'm a scientist, so we call that cold as fuck, right? Tell us about getting your fucking testicles into -2 degree water. What's that about?
Yeah, so that's the midwinter swim. It's a bit of a tradition on most Antarctic stations, but you have to cut a hole through the sea ice because the ocean's frozen at that point of the year. So you cut a hole in the sea ice. You then have to have someone on watch kind of stirring the pool to make sure it doesn't refreeze. Because of course the ambient air temperature was about -22. The water's actually technically warmer, but of course your body feels the heat differential more differently. We had a little cabin set up, or a little kind of wagon set up just next to the pool, which was running a heater inside. So you get nice and hot in there, do some push-ups or try and do some burpees or something to get your body heat up. run outside, hook on the safety line, jump in or lower yourself into the water, and then, freeze, and then get out and get as quickly as you can up to the sauna to reheat yourself. I don't think I felt my toes for at least 3 or 4 hours after that.
How long did you stay in?
30 seconds or so. Wasn't much.
It's about 30. That's about 29 seconds longer than I would last. How many people did that? Is that an obligation or is that a voluntary thing?
Yeah, completely voluntary. We had 24 of us there for winter. I think probably 20 or 21, 22, like almost everyone. It did suit to have a couple of people that stayed dry and everything, so they could stay down there as safety officers and move the vehicles and things around. Whereas anyone that jumped in, once you got your clothes back on and everything, you still needed to probably start wandering back up to station and get warm, because you'll never quite warm yourself back up after a swim like that.
So what's in general terms, and I'm sure it's a bunch of things, David, but what's the focus of the research or the work that goes on, well, for your group anyway?
There's a whole lot of ongoing seabird work down there as well, obviously monitoring penguin rookeries and numbers. So a lot of citizen science we did was just heading out to different rookeries to swap memory cards and update time-lapse cameras and everything, which is interesting work. There's a lot of, in the summertime, a lot more work around the glaciers and monitoring the ice shelves and movements there and tracking some of that stuff as well, which can be done in coordination with satellites and then ground-based instruments. A lot of weather observation, a lot of space science and space weather, as they call it now, on measuring all sorts of different technical things up in the ionosphere and meteors and all that sort of stuff. We did some great stuff. We actually, a couple of the guys down there may have discovered some new auroral phenomenon with the Southern Lights, with some of the photos and stuff they took of that. So there's a whole range of different science. And then we did some underwater benthic ecology stuff as well, which is quite interesting, looking at on land in Antarctica, there's not much. There's penguins and there's a bit of moss. There's no trees and there's no sort of rodents and everything. But under the water, because it's similar temperatures to the depths around the world, you've got huge amounts of marine life and even some types of coral and everything. So that was probably some of the fascinating science I hadn't expected to see down there, is what's under the sea.
Can you literally walk out your door and walk 50 or 100 meters, drill a hole and fish?
You could, or you don't fish down there. If you think of it as planet Earth's national park in a lot of ways, you certainly don't do any fishing unless it's for scientific purposes. But yeah, we dropped at one point. We were doing some underwater photography stuff, and all we were doing was drilling holes in the ice every meter or so and putting the GoPro on a pole and taking some photos. And then a fish came up, and so looking at the photos later, found there was a fish that came up and looked at my GoPro and thankfully didn't eat it. But there's an abundance of stuff down there. And
that's why I would make a terrible environmentalist, because I would be the fuckwit out just fishing, and then David would be on the balcony going, "Hey, dumbass, what are you doing?" I'm catching dinner. Oh, okay. I didn't read page 2 on the fucking disclaimer. All right, on the contract. What did you do before? What did you do before that, David? Before you went to the Antarctic?
So I spent most of my professional career working overseas. I was an army officer for a couple of years, and then spent a decade with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I did a couple of postings to Pakistan, Iraq, and I lived in Turkey for a while over there doing some different things. And that experience in big government and then conflict zones really gave me a good sense of what it's like to work on that grand scale of it. The logistical and operational challenges of Antarctica are very hard to compare to anywhere in the world in terms of the access, but the way the whole operational tempo runs and the leadership aspects were all relatively similar to that other line of work. And that was an easy transition across. I'm sure there's a million things, but working in conflict zones and being able to execute under pressure, work under pressure, and do whatever you need to do at a high level under pressure. What did you learn, and how did you have to adapt, and what did you need to change, once you kind of grew into the role? Yeah, it's a good point. So I not only had an experience in that, but also had run, when I was working at the embassy or the High Commission in Pakistan, I was actually the president of the Coolabah Club there as well, which is a sort of diplomatic social club. And I'd always had a good balance between, right, you've got your professional challenges of working as a diplomat in a country like Pakistan's got its own challenges, but then running social aspects and a different side of your life. And you see this with community sport and others, that individuals that have a good balance of different experiences will then be able to draw on those when they get pushed or when they face a different challenge. You can go to the shelf of experience and go, oh, no, I've got this challenge. And that was what I think put me in or held me in good stead throughout the year and a half in Antarctica, was that each challenge that came up and each problem, be it a leadership problem or a social problem or community problems or individual problems or whatever it was, I had a good mix of experiences to then draw on. And there were certainly times like we had to do an emergency medical evacuation out of Davis on Christmas Eve 2020. And that was probably the only time I went fully into my crisis mode of, okay, this is directly drawn from experiences with the ADF and in conflict zones of like, right, there's time pressure, there's lives on the line kind of. And you've got this, you need to run it in a very structured, very dictatorship style of leadership. Like, right, you're doing this, you're doing that. You tell me this. I don't really care about all these other problems. We just need to focus on the operation here. Whereas at other times throughout an Antarctic winter, you have to sit back and go, no, let's just take our time to think about this, or let's see what the community wants to do, or what else could we do? And if we heard everyone's opinion, we can take it to a vote. And that was the challenge. And what I learned out of it all was that you can't just apply one type of leadership or community management to every scenario. You really have to draw on the different experiences.
100%. And when you're working with, how many people did you have, give or take?
So in summer, we had around 90 on station. I think it maxed out at about just over 100 during the resupplies. And then in winter, just 24 of us.
So you think about in summer, so you got 100 people. So you got 100 egos, attitudes, personalities, backgrounds, expectations, emotional states, and that's what you're navigating. And you can say one thing to someone and they respond positively, and someone else has a breakdown and someone hates your guts, and then someone else is confused and someone else is, yep, no worries. So that's the thing with not just leadership, but more broadly communication and connection. And, it's great to be the guy with the military background who can perform under pressure and execute when need to and all of those things. But day to day, you're just dealing with a bunch of different human beings, and none of them are exactly like you.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. And one of the fascinating things with the Antarctic stations is that even though there's only 90 people there in summer, the operational tempo in terms of running maritime assets, the aviation assets, the infrastructure side of things, then the scientific side of it, and then the field side of it, and then the community side and the industrial kitchen. And you've got, if you had to run the same operation in Australia, you'd have 2 or 3 times the amount of people to achieve the same thing as well. So it has this huge sort of pressure cooker vibe, and every scientist or every field leader thinks they're the most important project, and they want what they have fought and begged for to get the chance to go and do whatever it is that they need to do. So we only had 2 helicopters. We had a few planes in the program and stuff as well. It was very, very hard to get, and I know a great ops coordinator as well underneath me who could do all the spreadsheets and the planning for that sort of stuff. But it was really tough to make sure everyone got what they wanted. And then when people couldn't, and you'll never get everything done, that would land on my desk, and I'd have to kind of placate people and help them understand, we're doing this week, and then we'll try and get to your project, or we just can't get to your project. I'm terribly sorry, but that's that.
So is it fair to say that you were on a level a generalist managing a team of specialists?
Correct. And one of my guys actually called me out on this once. He's like, hey, your job's the only job on station you don't actually have any qualifications for. So, which was kind of funny, because in winter, everyone else has to be either, a chef or a mechanic or a doctor or a scientist or whatever. But the station leader, literally, it's like, have you got an Australian driver's license?
And can you string 6 words together?
Correct. Now, I didn't, on that particular occasion, I didn't go into the fact of, actually, I've got a bloody certificate of operations management and diploma of personnel management and a degree and all sorts of other stuff. But you go, no, technically leaders don't have a required qualification.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But your qualification is your track record, is what you've done, is your skills. But in an academic sense,
And that's another one that I find interesting, that these days I don't have a huge amount of academic qualifications, but I spent my entire professional career overseas at the coal face of the industries I'd wanted to work in. So I'd studied international relations and politics at uni, and then went forth and took part in international relations and politics all around the world. Yet some of my peers who stayed here, they've got PhDs and doctorates in, counterterrorism, all sorts of things. And you kind of look at it and go, oh, all right, well, that's great. You've got all these qualifications, but they may not have ever really lived and breathed what it's like in some of those locations. And there's a good balance to be had between the two. But I certainly feel at times at the moment in some of the corporate sector and other places that there's a little bit too much focus on formal qualifications. Oh, have you got that particular ticket, or have you got the qualification, or have you done the course for this, rather than valuing the experience and the kind of nexus between both experience and formal qualifications.
No, I'm with you.
Anyway,
And I'm doing a PhD, and I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, one of the misnomers I think around education is that it only happens in schools. And we hold that, while of course academic education matters, as you said, and it's important, but honestly, it doesn't compare, depending on what we're talking about, of course, different contexts, but it often doesn't compare to experiential learning, on the job, boots on the ground, doing stuff. It's like I opened Australia's first personal training centres. I employed 500 trainers. I did tens of thousands of PT sessions. I've done thousands of presentations on stage in front of however many people. And so my innate and intuitive and experiential understanding of psychology and human behaviour far outweighs anything I'm doing in my PhD, right? And it's nice. And I'm doing a PhD in psychology, essentially, neuropsychology, and it's great. But, I'm with you. I think that what you intuitively, instinctively and experientially know, as somebody who just has had a lot of experiences, a lot of interactions, solving a lot of problems, creating a lot of solutions and opportunities, it's day to day, it's more valuable. And again, it's not one or the other, but it's a pity that it doesn't get the recognition, that experiential learning, that sometimes it should.
No, I agree with you for sure.
Tell us about if there was such a thing as a regular day in the Antarctic. What time do you get up? Is it a 9 to 5 thing? Do people officially clock in and clock out at a certain time?
Yeah, so a regular day really was relatively 9 to 5. And we started work at 7:30, so you'd be up at 6:30. I'd do a quick sort of stretching and PT routine in my room, just so roll out of bed, do some push-ups, do some stretches, do that, get that done for the day. So you've done something. Walk yourself down, cook some breakfasts, look out the window, look at the weather forecasts. I'd catch up with my deputy down there. She was the chef, so I'd catch up with her just sort of after breakfast. We'd have a quick chat about anything that she'd seen overnight, because she'd be up much earlier than most others. And then wander over to my office, which was 50 meters away. So you rug up to just go outside, over to the office, check your emails, go to Zoom meetings with people back in Australia, check in with my bosses, call in with the other stations, see what they're up to. And then, whatever it was, depending on what day of the week it was, there might have been field work that was going out. If possible, I'd go out and join the field parties. If not, you just, send them out, off they go. Keep an eye on them for the day, do the radio checks, walk around the station, see what major projects are getting built, what's going, and just sort of check. And that's a kind of your boring day. Now, we were down there for 537 days in total. That's sort of your average day, and out of the 500 odd days, most of them would have been like that. But then you get your great days. So my best day out was we left station at sort of 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, blue sky day, riding the quad bikes across the sea ice, heading up around, like chasing sort of emperor penguin tracks and looking for penguins and seals out on the sea ice and doing all sorts of different things. And then we got about 30 or so Ks north of station, parked up at one of the huts there. At that point, the helicopters came up and they picked me up and took me. I had to go and do a reconnaissance flight over a glacier to have a look at some crevasses. So we flew out there, and now that was an operational safety sort of thing to have a look at those. But we're flying across a glacier at sunset. Is absolutely spectacular. So you're doing that, and because it's easier to see crevassing in low light with a low sun angle, of course. And so you're doing that. You're having a look at that, and then of course the helicopter drops me back at the hut, cup of tea, go to bed, get up the next day, and do it again. So look, that's your rock star days, and then you have your monotonous other days where you just, people are asking you stupid questions at breakfast, and people are complaining over the most pointless of things, and nothing's going to plan, and the weather's terrible, and everything's getting delayed and backed up, and you're sitting on a boring Zoom meeting with your boss going, "Why am I in this Zoom meeting?" And the same as anyone else can relate to.
No, you're never going to forget that day, though. I mean, I'm sure you had a lot of good days, but that day of like you're in a helicopter, you're in Antarctic, you're flying over glaciers, like it's ideal conditions, and you're like, this is my job. I'm in the most beautiful place on the planet without COVID, by the way.
Yep.
Flying over all these glaciers in this multi-million-dollar helicopter, and this is my job. This is ridiculous. Yeah. Did you ever get a sense of how the fuck did I land this?
I did. I had so many pinch myself moments. At one point as well, we were lucky enough at Davis to be quite close to an Indian, 3 other stations, the Indian, Russian, Chinese stations, about 100 k's from Davis. And then I was visiting the Indian station early in the season and chatted to the station leader there about, we should, he came up with the idea of like, we should get all the scientists and everyone together and run like a symposium. And I'm like, yeah, great idea. Sounds good. Just let us know. We'll fly down. A couple of months later, he's like, okay, we've organized it all. We want you to fly down with your scientists, with the Chinese scientists and the Russian scientists, the Indian scientists and Australians, and we'll do this like symposium down here, which had never really been done before. So we then ended up, so it was myself and I think 7 scientists flew down there, and there was, probably 100 people on the station that day, and all talking through, what are we doing? What are the Chinese doing? What are the Russians doing? What are the Indians doing? What can we learn from each other? How can we work together? And coming from a diplomatic background as well, it was such a breath of fresh air to see how well those 4 nations that ordinarily don't always get along. We probably get along pretty well with the Indians, but the Chinese and Russians at a diplomatic level, it's always a bit frosty. And it was just incredible. And I was pinching myself going, how is it that I've ended up here involved in, a diplomatic science symposium in Antarctica, and it's going well. And I'm having the relationships we had with the Chinese and Russians and Indians down there was phenomenal. And that was something that was a breath of fresh air in terms of international cooperation. I'd spend enough time in and around the worst elements of humanity in the war zones. And this was a sort of real good, like, there are some great opportunities to be had out there, and there's some great people. And, science is such a fascinating pursuit. And it's never ending. We'll never be finished with, there's always more science to be done. And that stuff's just incredible.
Well, that happened because there was no politicians involved, David.
Yeah. You're not entirely wrong. It was all working level. If you can get the working level people together, it's so good. And yet, you're right. You look at the G7 or G20 or CHOGM and any of those heads of government meetings, and you just go like, oh God, like, it all happens in the periphery. So that's the funny thing. If you can run the G7 or G20 or whatever online, and the presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens and caliphates or whatever can meet, but it's any of those meetings, anyone that's ever worked in international relations will tell you it all happens around that, with your working level ambassadors and secretaries, etc., to actually then follow through with whatever it is the 2 heads of government have agreed on.
How old were you, David, when you started down there?
In Antarctica, I was 34 when I took over as station leader.
My shoes are 34, dude. That is very fucking annoying. How many people do you reckon just quietly had their nose out of joint because you were maybe one of the youngest people there, but also the boss?
I don't think anyone really had their nose out of joint over that. It's not unheard of to have a young station leader, and I feel I had the right experience for that. There was certainly, I was on the younger side of things, but I never really had any problems with my age down there. The problem is, interestingly, there are issues with you, like all walks of life and all industries. You've got people that have been doing it that way for so many years, and old station leaders have the same problem with the same people of like, there's just old
Yeah.
mate, that's the way he does it, and he won't listen to you. And that wasn't a problem because I was young, and it would have been the same problem for older station leaders. And that was actually one of the best things I did down there. Anytime I felt, oh, geez, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on here. I feel like I just lost. Calling former station leaders out of the blue, people I hadn't even met, but I knew they'd sat in my chair.
Yeah.
And call them up and be like, hey, got this problem or what? And they just laugh at you and be like, oh, mate, it happens every year. It's not you. That's just Antarctic stations just bring out these strange sort of circumstances. And yeah, and that helped me sort of relax a bit and go, oh yeah, these aren't problems because of me. These are problems that just happen, and don't take it personally, and take your own ego and everything out of it about your leadership of like, oh, it's not you. That just happens. Don't beat yourself up.
I'm trying to picture in my head, David, like what this joint looks like inside, how big it is. Is it pokey? Are you on top of each other? Is it palatial? Has everyone got their own room? Is there 4 people to a room? Have you got TV? Like what can you give us an idea of what the living conditions and working conditions were like on a physical level?
Yeah, it's pretty good. So the director of the AAD, Kim Ellis, he actually describes it as a ski resort. Everyone's for the wintering team, everyone's got their own room. There's a cinema, there's a bar, there's a pool table, there's a pretty good lounge area with an incredible view out across the ocean and the icebergs, etc. You've got separate buildings with the gym's a bit pokey and squished into the warehouse, etc. But you've got boat sheds and you've got generator plants, you've got the science, couple of science buildings, an ops building, a comms building, satellites, and storage facilities and fuel tanks and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it's decentralized so that if you did have a fire or an emergency in one building, you don't lose the whole setup. And it's but at the same time, at times in summer when it's pretty busy, and in the summer accommodation, a few people do have to share there if they're not staying for that long. It would slide away from being a ski resort towards a backpackers in kind of, Austria or somewhere like that, where like it looks all pretty good, but you cram enough Aussies in there and it gets a bit kind of wild.
What were some of your challenges in terms of the interpersonal stuff, the sociological stuff, just managing the energy and the culture of, I know it was down to 24 or 5 people and then up to nearly 100 people, but just managing that human stuff. Did you have a particular strategy or were you just fluid?
Very fluid. And I had some good advice early on from my boss as well. He's like, sometimes just let it run. Don't try and get too involved in the community and the social side of it. That the best way to do it can be to sit back, but at the same time, you've got to draw your lines. Summer was a piece of cake with a lot of that. There were a few issues with a couple of individuals in summer, but never anything too serious or too ongoing that wasn't able to just sort of get over it within a week and focus them on something else or keep them away from each other, and it'd be fine. And it was a short enough run. I had enough energy to kind of get through it. But the winter, and you're talking about now from when the ship left in March 2020, just as COVID was really breaking out, we didn't see another ship until very late February /March 2021. So we went nearly 12 months with just the 24 of us. We then lost 2 people out on that medevac in December. Yeah, by the latter half of that, people were getting on each other's nerves, as you would. You go anywhere with your best mates for more than a week and you hate each other by the end, and you think of how long we're down there. So I did have to mediate a few things. And the crux of it was often a lack of perspective or understanding of the other person's role. And the blinkers sort of started to come on of everyone knew what their job was, and you get very efficient and very good at your job. So you then start looking at what other people are doing, and you're saying like, oh, I'm getting up at 7 o'clock every morning and I'm at work at 7:30 and doing this, but like, oh, why is he, wearing tracksuit pants and getting out of bed at 8 o'clock? And you're like, well, he's the radar technician or something, like he's fine. He can work from his tracksuit pants on the couch. You can't, but at the same time you go, well, and you go to the other guy and you're like, look, the optics of it, mate, maybe if you could put some pants on occasionally, look a bit better. These are all kind of made up versions of things that did happen. And that became a challenge. But one of the key moments was in October 2020. So as we're a long way into our season and still a long way to go, when it was getting pretty dark and pretty rough in terms of interpersonal things, we had to do, annoyingly at Davis, they don't have access to fresh water. So we had to pump water out of the ocean into a small tarn or little reservoir, and then we desalinate it from there. And we had to pump water 800 meters up a small rise and into this little tarn. And in ordinary conditions, that'd be like pumping water from one dam to your other dam, 800 meters away. You'd set up a hose and a pump, you let it run, you go and have lunch, you come back and your water's pumped for the day. And it'd be a piece of cake on a farm, and you'd be sunburnt. We were doing that in like minus 20, 30, 40 knot winds that you're pumping water in minus 20. So of course the hose kept freezing and exploding. And there was 3 plumbers on station and the building supervisor who were in charge of it. 3 plumbers were all quite different, but they were the shift leaders. I'll tell you what, by the end of that, and that took about a month, by the end of that, there was 24 expert plumbers, and we were just tearing each other's like hair out with different ways to do it. Like, what if we do it this way? Why do we do it that way? And I was guilty of it too. And that was probably a highlight looking back in terms of, geez, that's what teamwork and pressure really looks like when everyone's sick of each other. And the way we started doing that problem and the way we finished it were markedly different. If we had to do it again, we'd be great. But that was a learning experience, and it certainly pushed a few people to breaking point. At that point, there was a few problems that were hard to deal with.
Well, I mean, life is about, work is about, relationships are about, in many ways, solving problems, aren't they? And when you're in that environment, which is not ideal for a lot of things, like you're working with limited resources in really tough conditions under enormous pressure, practical pressure, emotional pressure, social pressure, trying to get on. I know one of the things that you talk about in your gigs and in your kind of public stuff is resilience.
Yep.
So how much of performing under pressure, David, do you think is about background, conditioning, training, preparation, and how much is about the individual, how they're wired? And I know this is an opinion. I don't want data, but just you've been in a conflict zone. You've been at the front line of the shit fest on multiple occasions. You've been in the toughest environments. So, and you are a leader, and you do need and have developed resilience to a high level. Just what do you think around that?
No, it's some good questions in there. And I've been blown away by some individuals who are just absolutely incredible. Yet if you looked at their professional resume or their experiences, there's nothing that says that person will be a superstar other than their actual attitude and approach to life. Their why and their motivations underneath that of what are they doing here and why do they get out of bed in the morning. And some of the best examples I saw were from individuals who they wanted a full Antarctic experience, or they wanted the full war zone experience, and whatever that was, that's what they wanted. And if it meant that it was tough and it was challenging and that not everyone got along and that there was problems, they ate it up and were like, oh, this is what I wanted. I wanted these challenges. I didn't want it to go to plan because going to plan's boring. And those people did phenomenally well. Yet at the other end of that, there was a number of individuals that, maybe did have slightly better resumes of, okay, they'd had experiences here and there, or even had done previous Antarctic seasons. And that didn't always translate to them having the resilience and the skills that you might then expect. And the way I sort of unpicked some of that, and I saw this in the war zones too, with people who've gone back for trip after trip after trip after trip, why they started and wanting to go to war and where they ended up, and same with Antarctica, your motivations will change, and having an understanding of why you're there each time is something that if you get that wrong, when it's pushed, it won't work. And you see this in a lot of walks of life that if you started out for X reason, but you end up doing it for the money, or that it's now your new comfort zone is going to Antarctica or going to war zones or going to the building site or whatever it is that's your new comfort zone, if it starts to get tricky, you'll fall over. Whereas back at the start, when you went to war or Antarctica or whatever, for whatever reasons, and it gets tough, you're like, oh, this is what I wanted. I wanted tough. I wanted it to be challenging. I wanted it to be different. And that became an interesting thing to observe down south, was how each person dealt with the challenges. And once it didn't go to plan, once it was like, oh, yeah, you're not going home in November, you're going home in March, that hit a few people like a freight train. It hit us all like a freight train, but a few people never really got back on the rails after that.
What did you have? How did you have to adapt? I mean, improvise, adapt, overcome. How did you have to adapt because you went down there for 12 months and stayed for over a year and a half?
Yep.
What about you? What about the self-management for you?
The biggest thing for me was that when that changed from, all right, you're not going home, and we only found out in June of 2020 that we were not going home in November. The writing was on the wall, but we only officially found out in June. And when we should have only been, 2 or 3 months from starting to see planes and everything coming into the station. So to say at that point, to say, oh, actually, you've got nearly 300 days to go, you're like, oh, I can swear on this podcast. You're like,
you can say fuck.
Like, wow.
So that was June last year, right? 2020.
June 2020, we found out we weren't going home in November. We'd be going home in March, April, the year after. And at that point, my job changed, and I had to mentally flick a switch between leading a team of people that wanted to be there and were getting what they signed up for, to leading a team that now, and myself included in that team, didn't necessarily want to be there anymore. We were now there against our will, so to speak, or there longer than ever anticipated. And the bulk of it, and in fact, everyone did a really good job to manage that in their own way and go, okay, here's what I'm going to do with that experience and make the most out of it. And what I learned and what I changed was to then professionally go, this is a unique leadership opportunity. Very few people will ever get a chance to experience this. Back to what you said before, you could spend your entire fortune on studying leadership and going to Harvard and doing your MBA and doing all sorts of things and seeking leadership opportunities. I was professionally lucky enough to get the chance to lead an Antarctic station for an extended season through an international pandemic. And you can't apply for that job. It just landed on my lap. So I made the decision to, I'm going to try and make the most out of this and try and find the positives in a very tough situation.
Just think of all the expedition leaders, other than the ones who were, from the other countries at the same time, of all the people that have been, leaders in that environment, you're the only one who stayed for that long because of a global pandemic. So it's quite unique.
There's a few, so it'd be great to one day get together. So I know that the Indians were in the same situation as us. They had to double summer. There was I think there was a guy that came out of McMurdo recently, who he was from my cohort as well, and he'd summer, winter, or something like that out of McMurdo for, a while. So there was a few. I wasn't the only one. I was the longest out of the Australians that got stuck down there. But my nearest colleague, Matt, who was the station leader over at Mawson, he and I had been in the same cohort. They went down a little bit later, but similar total amounts of time and similar experiences. So I wasn't the only one. At Davis, it did have a longer run and did have a few other challenges that made it a bit more unique. But but again, out of the total numbers of every year, there's dozens of stations and dozens of station leaders. Very few get to see a pandemic from the sideline.
Don't you reckon it's interesting, the correlation or the relationship between expectation and outcome or impact or result? It's like if you had gone down there and we went, mate, you're going for 537 days, and you're like, okay, yep. And everyone went down there and that's what we're doing. Yep. Well, I know not everyone was there, but you. But when you go down and you're going, I'm doing 365, give or take. So you're mentally, emotionally, practically prepared for 365, and then someone moves the goalposts. You're still doing the same job in the same joint with the same resources, essentially. But because you weren't emotionally kind of or psychologically there, it shifts. It's amazing how that just that one variable can, I know it didn't you, but derail some people. Totally understandably.
No, for sure. And I get this a lot with talking to different groups about, how do you get through lockdowns and isolation and everything. And it comes back to routine. And I found that you can't get too stuck in your routine, that if your routine is, I get out of bed and I do this and then I do that and then I do that and that, understand that routine is completely, you constructed that. You didn't, you don't control the weather and you don't control the enemy and you don't control a lot of things. So you focus on what you can control. And then you find that people will construct all this apparatus around them and that becomes their daily routine or their weekly routine, their monthly routine. And then the minute that starts to get rattled, they then start falling apart again. You're like, none of this matters, mate. Like you can change all of that stuff again and rebuild that apparatus with the same core, foundations in it. But the stuff outside of that, that's what we're kind of either here to do or let that go. And I found that to be strange, that my approach was always, all right, this is what we're doing this week. That's what we're doing next month. We just do that. And then you do enough of that and then one day it will end. And it's almost the same now with lockdown here in Melbourne, that I stopped really caring about when the new end of lockdown date is. I'm like, right, when Dan and Brett tell me it's over, it's over. Until then, I'm going to be building my deck and doing my backyard and doing my online talks and doing any podcast that wants to have me on. So you just roll with that. And at a point, we'll be out of lockdown and you do things like you get your vaccinations and you do that stuff as well, rather than if you become too fixated on, oh, no, but they said we're going to, on the 2nd of September, we're reviewing and freedom. And then you get locked into this other stuff. And so I've gone on a complete tangent here from the question, but you can't get too tied to your routine if it is going to then mean you don't have any flexibility if things change. And in a pandemic, in a war zone, in Antarctica, in life, you will never predict what's going to happen. If you can't pivot, and to use the 2021 buzzword.
Come on, mate. Do better. Come on.
I haven't used unprecedented yet. And
if you can't,
deal with that or improvise, adapt, overcome, or reset your OODA loop, the other old adage there as well, you kind of, then you're just stuck. And
I think also, I agree with all of that 100%. But what we do is we waste a lot of mental, emotional, and even physical energy about the shit that we can't change or control, David. So I'm with you. It's like, I don't like the lockdown either, but when it ends, it's got fucking nothing to do with me. So I'll just manage me in the middle of the unmanageableness, right? So I can't change the weather. I can't change Dan or Brett. I can't affect or influence the government individually. Doesn't mean I don't care. It just means that today what I'm going to do is make better decisions, be aware of my energy, be aware of where my attention and my focus is, and decide what's the best use of my energy, time, skill, focus today based on who I want to be and how I want to be. And me jumping online in a shit fest with people about whatever, face masks or social distancing or pick a related topic, and I'm not pro or anti, it just doesn't help. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help what we're in. And that's the thing though, is we are, for me, it's so much about not how do I manage what's going on around me, but how do I manage what's going on within me? And whether or not that's in war, whether or not that's in a marriage, whether or not that's in a pandemic, whether or not that's, at a job that you don't love, or on a work site where there's some dickheads, or, it's what's in my control and what's not, and what am I investing my energy in, and what will give me the best outcome.
No, absolutely. And but a little comment you've said, just to pull a little thread, is dickheads in the workplace, they're everywhere. Like I've worked with some pretty pointy end organizations and units and stuff over the years. And I tell you what, there is no perfect organization or perfect team, no matter what selection process or how expert or how experienced or how brilliant everyone is. You get in the room at the pointy end of it all, and there's still someone who's like, what's he doing? Who bought this Muppet? And you just, that everywhere you go. So you just, from that, my takeaway was always just lead the team you've got, or work with the team that's around you. You'll never get this perfect unicorn team of everyone's self-started and self-motivated and resilient and all these sorts of buzzwords. Like there's always an idiot. There's always someone managing their divorce or distracted by their kids, or human elements will get in the way of everything, or be part of it, and just having to understand that everyone's journey is so different, and that at different points, certainly in a crisis, you'll have all sorts of competing things, of which your workplace or something is really low on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and everything as well, of like, well, yeah, you're here to work, but if your home life's falling apart, or you've got all this other stuff on your mind, you need to understand that as a team or a leader to factor that in and get it right.
Well, the stuff that I do, where I talk to, everyone across the spectrum in different businesses and companies and organizations, but my starting point is always on a physical, mental, emotional level. If you can't manage you well, then everything else is going to be substandard. So if you turn up to work and you're a 3 out of 10 physically and a 4 out of 10 emotionally and a 2 out of 10 psychologically, good luck being a good team member, or being a good boss, or being a good employee, or being a good leader, or problem solver or creator. And so our personal responsibility before we take on the corporate or collective responsibility is to get the most out of ourselves and to manage, I need to manage my mind, body, emotions, choices, behaviors, lifestyle, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. I need to manage that as well as I can, so that puts me in the best place to do the work that I need to do optimally. Because if I'm physically, mentally, emotionally fucked, I don't do anything well.
No, for sure. And I think that importantly as well, and listening to some of your other guests you've had on previously talking about this, the martial artist champion, whatever.
The lady, what was her name, Tiff?
Nadine.
Yeah, she was great.
Nadine.
And some of the stuff she was saying in terms of it's all right to make mistakes, and you'll fail, and that's how you learn. And then accepting that you're not, even the best are gonna have horrible days and make huge mistakes and get it wrong, and then learn from that and move forward. And I think having that self-awareness then becomes so important. And the key points you've mentioned there in terms of, if you've got your nutrition right, and you've got your physical right, and your emotional, and all these things, and knowing when, being in touch with that element of yourself, to know that when that's not right, that you're now not operating at 10 out of 10, and trying to be like, all right, if I'm competing at the Olympics, I need to be 10 out of 10 on that day. Yeah. How do I lead up to that? Because you can't be, and this comes into like what they call the Cooper conditions in terms of human response times and everything as well, of you can't stay at condition red for too long, because it's fight or flight mode at condition red. You need to level through that. And I think that's the same in a lot of other approaches then to things like the pandemic and change and everything, is that you can't just be at 10 out of 10 and 100% every day. You'll have to have slower tempo days, or days where you're off, and owning that, and then acknowledging that. And I had one of the guys in the team, and I really respect him for it. At a point when I wasn't quite running right, he just quietly pulled me aside and said, look, he's like, you're not quite yourself lately. You're snapping at people, and you're a bit impulsive with a few decisions. I'm like, I know, I'm just not doing it right. There was a lot of other stuff going on that he didn't know about. And I sort of then chatted to him about some of the other things, and he's like, oh, we can help you with some of that. And I realized that I wasn't at my best, and then owned it and chatted to the group and said, apologies for, I have snapped at people, and they're just trying to get through this as well as everyone. And it sort of helped me then reset, like, oh yeah, this is terrible. And the 24 of us had to get through it as a team. And as much as I was the station leader, I was still just one of 24 people stuck at an Antarctic station that didn't want to be there that long. And having to flip between those two modes was quite challenging at times as well. So anyway.
At the end of the day though, mate, like me and like Tiff and like our listeners, you're just another bloke or lady, and and you're normal, and you're vulnerable, and you've got flaws and faults, and you have good days and bad days, and strengths and weaknesses, and peaks and troughs. And in the middle of all of the variability of the human experience, you go, well, I'm doing my best, and today I was shit, sorry, or today I was awesome.
Yep.
Or today I had, 5 light bulb moments, or today I fucked up 3 things. And I think for me, that's courage. Like vulnerability and courage are intertwined, right? And vulnerability is going, I'm in charge, I'm the leader. However, sometimes I get shit wrong, and sometimes I need to debrief to you, even though you're under me and the hierarchy in this joint, because really it's just 24 humans, and the link between all of us ultimately is not our job or not the company we work for, but rather our humanity. And when you can get all the ideas and titles and bullshit and hierarchy out of the way and go, look, fuck, I'm struggling. And, that's the beauty of it. And I think, like, one of the things I try, and I'm not special or spectacular or gifted or a high achiever on any level, but one of the things that I try and do through this is go, well, I'm a 57-year-old bloke and I've done lots of cool shit and I'm pretty fit and pretty strong and pretty healthy and maybe a bit of an alpha male, but not really. But by the way, I fuck up on a daily basis. I overthink. I'm insecure. I want you to like me. I've got a big ego and low self-esteem sometimes. And please be my friend and give me a cuddle. Right?
Yep.
And the more you like that, which is real, the more people go, oh, thank God. Because when you put yourself up as the fucking high watermark of excellence and perfection and invincibility, one, that's bullshit.
Yep.
Two, you create a prison for yourself that you can't leave. And three, people don't connect with you because you're like a fucking robot.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Spot on.
So tell us about I'm just thinking about the practical stuff there, like food, and it is obviously there's no fresh food. So what do you eat?
Well, we did have a little hydroponics setup, so we grew a lot of like cost lettuce and the odd baby tomato and a few other bits of, supplementary green food throughout the year. And that actually went pretty well. And that was actually a good community activity. So you've got all these different rosters of different things you got to do, but getting on the hydroponics roster was fun because in the little hydro hut, there was UV lights and it was quite humid. So Antarctica is really dry most of the time. So you could go into this room and get some UV light on your skin, which was good. And you put some tunes on. So you're dancing around in the fake sun. Inverted commas doesn't work on a podcast. So the hydroponics was good. Otherwise, just frozen food. But look, frozen veggies and frozen meats and everything these days lasted all of our time. And then crazily enough, 500 odd days away from Australia, we had fresh eggs to the end. Not fresh eggs, again, inverted commas. But there's this company in Tasmania that put this special oil coating on eggs. You keep them in the fridge, etc. And to the end, we were still able to crack eggs, make omelets, and fry an egg. Now, you couldn't poach them or anything at that point. They'd go a bit funny, but you could still make cakes and have an egg. So the food was great. We had a great chef. Can't speak highly enough of her. And not just cooking food, which again is a primary job, but reading the team and reading the room to know when to just throw out a prime cut of meat. If you went out in the field for a few days, she'd make up a cheese board or let you marinate your steaks and off you go. And then you cook it up on a camping stove or a little hut stove and have your day off station. And that's where the chef was just brilliant. And same with special events. So we had one guy's 30th birthday party down there. We did his full Viking theme. So I don't know he's Scottish actually, so a bit heritage rather than Viking. But either way, it was a Viking themed night. And one of the guys built like the head of a longboat and turned the table into a longboat. We had a massive kind of barbecue thing of just raw meats. And one of the other guys got up and gave a speech that like a Viking warlord would do to welcome the young man into the tribe. And, and then a great Viking themed cake and stuff as well. So you make your fun out of that, and the special events and food would form a big part of it, especially around, Christmases and that as well.
Mate, what about, love it. I love it that you're being creative and having fun and you're kind of ticking all the boxes, because you do have to have that stuff for morale and, energy and a bit of teamwork. But what about relationships? Are they forbidden? Are they okay? Do we look away? What goes on? No,
so that's tick that off your list. That's the number one question I get asked in my talks is what about relationships on station? But in the summer, it was pretty interesting. There was a good dynamic and a bit more diversity as well. The wintering team was, 3 females, 21 males, and quite male dominated there. Summer was a bit different. There was some stuff, but there's a couple of married couples within the Australian Antarctic program and others that they're down on station at the same time. And the backbone of a lot of the summering teams are often these couples that met down in Antarctica and now they've been married for years. And we had a married team in the wintering group, which is rare but not unheard of. And they were great, very low maintenance. You barely knew they were married most of the time in terms of it wasn't in your face and annoying. And otherwise, from my perspective as the station leader, not my problem in terms of what you're getting up to. Just don't let it get in the way of your work or mess with the, zen of the rest of the station. And thankfully it never really did.
Did you have a partner that was back home in Australia, or you were single?
I was single. This is actually, to really go into the personal side of things.
Come on, mate. Open the door. Give us fucking something, son.
Going to Antarctica had always been my divorce plan. I always figured that I figured by about 34 or so, I'd be married and everything. And I'd never be able to get to Antarctica as a station leader. But then I came out of a sort of 5-year relationship that disintegrated while I was in Iraq. I was back and forth to Iraq over a year and a bit. And, you'd catch up on holidays in Europe and it was good. And then you'd get it back to normal, and then you go back to Iraq again and it falls apart again. And then eventually that fell apart and I'm like, all right, that's it. Antarctica. And off I went.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And what about just a quick personal question? PTSD, any, some, none, all good?
None diagnosed. And none to a point that I'd say gets in the way of getting on with it. But like all, veterans and people that have lived and worked around conflict zones, there's elements of it that when you read the list of signs and symptoms of PTSD, you can see it. But it's probably the same as, the average Australian would look at the list of like, oh, what's an alcoholic and how much drinking's too much. You look at that list and you go, bugger me, that's how much, only 2 drinks ever at a time, and that's binge drinking. You're like, has whoever wrote this ever been to a pub? It's probably the same with PTSD, that most veterans and everyone, and they'll stand around and say, oh no, I'm fine, like I don't have anything. You go, right, go to the list of things. It's like, oh, do you avoid large crowds? Do you flinch at loud noises and revert to the way you thought, and can you vividly recall certain moments? And you're like, yeah, you can. Yep, I can remember the freaking smell of the room on that occasion, or like, and you're like, oh, you start to go, is that a problem? But anyway, so nothing diagnosed.
And mate, if everything goes awesome, what are you now? 36?
Yep, something like that.
If everything goes awesome, what are you going to be doing, give or take, when you're 40?
Well, great question. So the business model at the moment is running professional talking and webinars and everything on resilience and mental health, and really just telling the story of what we went through in Antarctica and what I learned out of it as a leader in such a unique experience. And then moving that towards leadership and management consulting. I love running like training workshops and those sorts of things as well. So hoping to, once we come out of the bubble, to move into that space, to get out and tell my story and teach others from the experiences I've had of what can make you a better individual and a better leader in all sorts of different things. So open to different job opportunities as they keep popping up. And I've got a few things in the pipeline that are helping towards that. The lockdown is not really helping too much, but it's
I feel you.
Yeah.
So if you listening to this and you've got a company or a team or an organization and you want the great man to come and have a chat to your team, whether that's face-to-face eventually, like real humans in a room, remember those days? Or in cyberspace, he can do that as well. How can people follow you and connect with you, David?
So I've got a personal website, so www.davidnoff.com, or book me through Saxton Speakers. So head to their website and then inquire about booking me to come and talk to your team and everything. So, and more than happy to do that and tailor it to whatever it is that your organization or company are looking for.
Perfect. You're the best, mate. Stay on the call if you would. Tiffany Ann Cook, thank you for securing another good guest.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Love you guts.